Hi guys, how's it going? As we're in quite a confusing current state of affairs, I wanted to share some thoughts on what I think the impacts to the digital economy could be for COVID-19 and how that might impact us on a day-to-day level. The first thing I mentioned is the high street. So a lot of typical UK high streets are made up of a House of Fraser at one end, a Debenhams at the other, with Arcadia Group shops like Burton, Dorothy Perkins, Miss Selfridge, Topshop, etc. in between.
Do you mind not looking at me like that all the time?
And then smaller and independent retailers sprinkled in amongst those. Now the high street's been in trouble for a number of years, and we've seen a lot of high-profile high street shops go out of business. A lot of people my age are still sad that we can't go to Blockbuster Video anymore.
There you go.
Yes, that's a Blockbuster Video membership card, sir.
That's right.
Even though it's the fact that we stopped going that's the reason they went out of business, but never mind. So for the high streets with social isolation, footfall is obviously going to go down. Even if footfall had remained at 100% of what it was, a lot of these shops would be in trouble anyway. But with reduced footfall, that reduces revenues, whilst costs are really not decreasing enough. So a lot of these shops are going to be unable to pay their suppliers. And if nothing changes, we might see a first round of failures around June, and then a second round in January after yet another disappointing Christmas for retailers. Now that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is that this COVID-19 event actually ends up saving the high street, as all of us who have been locked away for the last week or more realize the dreadful cost of isolation and what will happen to each of us if we don't keep shopping locally. If we think clearly, we'll realize how important human contact is, and we won't try and solve all our problems with Amazon Prime for goods and Netflix for entertainment. But we'll see how that goes. Whatever happens, e-commerce has been shown to be even more important than we realized through this time. Now, not everyone can just retrain for digital economy jobs, and there's a large number of reasons for that, and that's fine. And we're always going to need face-to-face customer service, and we're always going to need human interaction for huge swathes of industry. Customer service will always be vital, robots don't cut your hair, and restaurants will always need service with a smile. But still, if you're young and you're bright, and you've been working for a while in maybe a local shop, then it might be prudent to get online, especially if you're isolated in this time, and start doing some training in e-commerce jobs or graphic design or SEO, that's search engine optimization, or coding, so that you can maximize your options. There's a huge array of digital economy jobs that it's worth looking into. I'm sure all of you have great minds that can really be put to good use in this time. We've got billions of global users away from their office desks at the moment. So the next major impact I expect to see is the end-to-end digitization and integration of supply chains. And what that basically means is that if my deliveries to my company next week rely on Angela in accounting to make sure she speaks on the phone to Stuart, the sales manager from my supplier, and both Angela and Stuart are in quarantine, then my business grinds to a halt, my imaginary business. But if my purchasing is cloud-based and has automated integrations with a number of suppliers, then there's no reason why the data portion needs to stop. The only bottleneck then becomes logistics, staffing, or on-site service. Now, if you want to know quickly the degree to which your business is digitized and automated and the degree to which that can be improved, there's a simple test. In your business processes, from procurement to pay, from sell to cash, and in management reporting, how many times do you use Excel to communicate? The likelihood is that each time you see Excel popping up in your business, that's an opportunity for automation and better digitization where human interaction is unnecessarily being relied upon. Think about it. A third significant impact to the digital economy from this event is what I would term the danger of artificial intelligence responses to a black swan event. Let me explain what I mean by this. So a black swan event is an unpredictable and obviously rare event that has huge impacts. It can't be predicted using normal models like we've seen with the outbreak of COVID-19. Once it occurred, maybe epidemiologically we can model how it's going to spread, but we couldn't have predicted that it was going to arise at the time that it did. Now, if in a sales business you're using standard algorithms to analyze sales over the last 2 months, then you're going to have a problem because sales of tinned goods and toilet paper could be analyzed as having patterns maybe similar in some respects to fidget spinners or whatever 8-year-olds were buying last Christmas. The problem is that what happened to tins and toilet paper was more related to the social marginal propensity to save than it was really to marginal propensity to consume. People were not buying toilet roll to consume it, they were simply shifting savings they had in an account in pounds into a savings account of toilet roll and tins in their airing cupboard. So if your standard algorithm is now saying that these items are trending and are going to continue to do so, then they're going to cause you procurement problems. The truth truth is that this current event is probably going to screw with algorithmic data for the next 3 years, and so we're going to need human inputs in conjunction with data to help us reforecast intelligently. In the same way, any business that's taken a huge negative hit, well, which is obviously the majority of businesses, needs to reforecast for the period after social and economic restabilization in a way that doesn't unduly skew to the data that was produced during this period. So be careful of relying too much on the black swan. So lastly, and I'm taking a bit more of a stretch here, on a global scale we could see a complete macroeconomic readjustment. So in the global era, we've so far seen 3 major systems or 3 major macroeconomic regimes. The first was the gold standard. It emerged in about the 1880s as a result of steamships, because all of a sudden we could power goods around the globe and have international trade like that. We needed money to move between countries without becoming devalued, so we used the gold standard to try and give money a real value. One of many problems with that was it resulted in a deflationary model where a shifting balance of trade caused high wage volatility, and workers really bore the brunt of that. That regime crashed in World War I. Then at the end of World War II, we established the second macroeconomic regime. This is known as Bretton Woods, and it's because it was established by something called the Bretton Woods Conference. Their goal was to create full employment. It resulted in high inflation, and in that time, of course, we saw a load of nationalised industries like British Steel, British Rail, British Telecom, and in France a similar thing with French national champions, which was called French dirigism. Interestingly, this time we saw a huge swing in capital to labour ratio of GDP. So in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, as a percentage of GDP, capital to labour was about 65 to 35%. But by 1973 that had inverted, so as a percentage of GDP, capital was at 44% and labour was at 56%. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that productivity in all that time was going up, but wages were going up directly with the productivity, which meant capital was earning nothing from their investment. Because of the full employment, it meant workers were very empowered, and that meant there were non-stop strikes and there was stagflation in the 70s, causing huge economic problems. Capital investors got fed up and so pulled out their money. And so that second Bretton Woods economic regime crashed as well. Then in the 1980s we moved to what's known as neoliberalism, or maybe the shareholder value model is a part of that. And this was aimed at price stability with low inflation. We had open financial markets. It was all about global firms, global profits. And now we begin to see a privatization of state assets, so British Rail becomes Northern Rail, Virgin Rail, Great Western Rail, etc. Central banks were made independent so that politicians could no longer be blamed for monetary policy adjustments that privatized capital over labor. So capital starts to boom again, and what do we see here? We see spiraling risk and inequality, and really the start of a slow build Ponzi scheme. If you look at the same graph extended to 2008, you'll see that capital over-earned against labor, causing a huge inequality gap. And a high degree of coupling across global markets meant that we had a global crash in 2008. A lot of my understanding here has come from listening to Mark Blythe talk around these subjects, and I'd really recommend his talk, A Brief History of How We Got Here and Why. I'll put a link in the description. I don't agree with all his policy recommendations, but he's brilliant. So in 2008 we were expecting to be reset with a new macroeconomic regime, a new policy model, but instead of allowing the system to crash and be reset with a new paradigm, the banks were bailed out, and so we've struggled on since then. But now what we've experienced is a crash of the crashed system. As a response to this crisis, UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, essentially provided national capital backing to the entirety of British industry, and this event is completely unprecedented, as is the current global shutdown.
This national effort will be underpinned by government interventions in the economy on a scale unimaginable only a few weeks ago.
Now, bizarrely, controversially, one aspect of the current crisis that could be considered in a positive light is the fact that it's global in nature means that all markets are being similarly stressed simultaneously. What this means is that capital flows are less likely to exit any one country to go to another, aside from standard stabilization techniques like moving to US dollar or other value stores. And if countries emerge at similar times, this may well hold. This means that we wouldn't necessarily see one country's economy crash so that another's can thrive, as we've seen after other events. But it does seem likely that this COVID-19 crisis is likely to be the event that takes us into the next chapter of global macroeconomic regimes. It's difficult to predict what that would look like, but I expect to see a higher level of social responsibility from financial firms, including mandated investments into medical and climate solutions. Apparently infectious disease events are strongly correlated with right-wing movements, so increased political polarization is something we need to be aware of as a danger and guard against. The truth is, nobody's going to be saved through good economic policy or good political policy. The human heart's the thing that needs saving. So do with that what you will, and I will see you soon, probably with another travel video. Bye.